In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. So hello folks, and welcome to another episode of Hour with the Moon. And this time we have a visitor. Delighted to say, all the way from Wales, we have a young storyteller, Ffion Phillips. Hi Ffion.
Hi Tom.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Slightly windswept, but I'm just about got used to that now.
I'm hoping interesting comes in with that as well, windswept and interesting. So this is your first time in Orkney?
Yeah, been hearing a lot about it from Ailsa for the past 3 years that I've known her, but this is the first time I've managed to actually make it up here. So we've just been here for, I think, 2 weeks-ish now, staying with her uncle and doing a wee bit of island hopping and just, generally exploring and seeing all the cool things and the abundance of Neolithic stones, which I'm super jealous of.
It's funny that I remember somebody saying that they were really excited about all the Neolithic sites. It's Marius, a friend of ours, a writer, travel writer, and he says, it's like, wow, this is wonderful. And then by week 2, it's like, another bloody stone circle, or, it's just sort of, you get used to it. But you never take it for granted. But you must, presumably you see a slight difference in the landscape here compared to where you come from.
Yeah, it's so weird. It still doesn't quite feel like a real landscape to me. There's definitely a bit of my brain that gets confused every few hours. And it's like, wait, hold on. I haven't seen any woodlands in a while. Where are all the trees? I come from a valley which is wooded on both sides. And spend a great deal of time in the woodland. So I feel like if I was here any longer, I might start to go a bit mad from the treelessness. But I am absolutely loving it here and really loving the coastlines and all the different kinds of beaches. I didn't realise there was quite so much nuance in the different rock formations you get and just the different colours of sand in such a relatively small area.
Ron's sitting on the corner nodding away there when you're talking about trees. So where is home?
So home for me is the Conwy Valley in North Wales, Dyffryn Conwy, which is quite close to Snowdonia National Park, or Eryri. And quite close to the North Wales coast, which has, Anglesey. It has a little sticky out bit called Llandudno. It has endless static caravan parks. But yeah, my valley itself, it's, flat floodplain, beautiful River Conwy. There's like a little silver ribbon just dancing her way through, and lots of sheep.
We have one or two here as well, but I suppose it's mostly coos here. But so what's the background there?
In terms of like why I'm in North Wales, or
no, I was just meaning like what do you do, or what is your family background?
So my family background is mostly English and a bit of Welsh. So there are lots of families that have been in the Conwy Valley for absolute generations. Like I've got friends at school who are somehow related to everybody and know every bit of gossip ever. But my dad moved to the valley in about the 90s with inheritance money from his dad, who sadly died quite young of a heart attack. And my dad just bought a bit of woodland, which was mostly conifer and had been pretty trashed by the Second World War and was still sort of recovering, and still is recovering, and lived in a teepee in the woods for a year, just doing conservation stuff. And then gradually a house came up for sale, which he moved into. And then at some point, my mum moved in as well. And then more little fields just kept coming up right adjacent to each other when they were still a sensible price. Some of them we bought from this group of brothers who were still in a cycle of just absolute gallons of weed killer. And then, of course, you need gallons of fertilizer. So then you have endless nettles and thistles. So then you need gallons of weed killer. And the cycle would just sort of carry on for years and years, you know, with the scarcity mindset, again, from the way the valley changed in the Second World War. And we've gradually just been chipping away at it to the point now that we're actually seeing some changes and seeing butterflies and seeing just a huge variety of wildflowers. Some seeds that were just under the ground in seed banks, some that we've bought, some that we've been given by friends or sort of taken from other places. But yeah, that's sort of my family background and what we're doing. It's slightly unconventional, but I absolutely love it. And the land means an awful lot to me and has a very big place in my heart. And yeah, when I get home, because I'm going to spend a bit of time at Fringe, it will be time to mow the meadow with the very beat up 2-wheel tractor that we've got. So yeah, it's kind of never ending.
I think they're called bicycles.
It's not quite a bicycle, Tom. It does technically have an engine sometimes.
So it's a motorbike.
When it works. Yeah, it's a very weird motorbike. Very, very duct taped. So yeah, never ending, kind of relentless, but also sort of beautiful.
I really, really admire and respect that because, I'm a farm boy, born and brought up on a farm next to the sea. And, over my lifetime, which is considerably longer than your one, then, there was more and more fertilizers being used. There was more and more insecticide and weed killer and such like. And you kind of knew sometimes in the country, not necessarily around where I was born, but my dad inherited another farm out in Sandwich when his brother died. And when the crops were being sprayed, you would find dead birds lying along the side of the road, So, they were using insecticide, which then the birds were eating the dead insects and getting poisoned. And I realized that we need to produce food. I'm not bashing farming because,
absolutely.
I'm part of that. But Christ, we got to respect the planet that we live on,
Yeah, and it is incredibly difficult figuring out, how on earth we would even strike that balance with so many people. And there's real clash as well because the farming landscape in Wales is so culturally important to people. It's so tied into language. And it is really difficult when you end up with narratives that are saying that kind of what the landscape needs is for people to be taken out of it and to, for it all to just run wild again. And there's so much sort of debate in the conservation community about, where you'd even go from here. So yeah, it's strange, but just sort of trying our best with the little patch that we've got to try and make, even at least a bit of change, which isn't monumental. It's just like there were 0 common blue butterfly pairs. Now there are 12. Win. And of course, we've still got all of our farming neighbours around us who I went to school with most of their kids. So yeah, it's definitely difficult.
But the kind of the reason that you've been invited along to have a blether and all that is because you're a storyteller. When did you get into that? Why the fascination with stories? People keep asking me that, so I thought I might as well ask somebody else it for a change.
Yeah, well, for me, I get to thank the wonderful Fiona Collins, who is a storyteller based in Llangollen, because she set up a little club for kids in Venue Cymru, which is the theatre nearest to me in Llandudno. It's just called Story Circle. And it was just the most basic introduction to storytelling for kids. There was a lot of running around. I think what attracted a lot of people was the free childcare, because you could get rid of us all for a couple of hours. But I absolutely fell in love with storytelling. And there was a competition every year, Young Storyteller of Wales, which is still going. I kind of just never stopped. I discovered this whole world of storytelling, because when you're an 8-year-old kid, of course you've got an overactive imagination, you're making up stories. But I thought there was something so cool about telling stories that other people had told, and that were older than I was. A lot older than I was when I was 8, But I really fell in love with it and just sort of kept going.
So what kind of stories were they telling?
So Story Circle was taking, stories from all over the place, just anything that would keep the attention of a whole group of kids who were mostly trying to run around. But I fell in love more with specifically Welsh stories. Most of all, stories that were set within the Conwy Valley or within Snowdonia, where, I could point out the car window and say, hey, that rock there was lobbed by this particular giant. So stuff that was very in touch with the landscape.
That's very like it is here as well, where it's, this happened on that mound there. No, not that mound there, that mound there. On that stone there, on that mound. It's very site-specific rather than once upon a time far, far away, or there was once, it lived in a forest, because we'd be going, what forest?
Which forest?
Yeah.
Which tree specifically?
Yeah.
Don't listen to him over there who tells you it's that tree, it's this tree, he's wrong.
Then when they get drunk, start fighting over which tree it was. But so you kind of fell in love really with Welsh folk tales.
Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend that there's some unbroken chain of never damaged Welsh storytelling, and we have every story that we ever need. We've lost absolutely mountains and mountains and mountains of stuff. Thanks, Methodism. Chapel culture is great in many ways. Has a lot to do with the survival of the Welsh language. But damn, we lost a lot of stuff. So a lot of the time, I'll find myself drawn to just random fragments of stories that have been written down, normally by some minister or some school teacher or some antiquarian. So I admit that a lot of what I tell, I'm having to sort of reimagine and sort of try and think about it in the context of the other stories that, more people can vouch for and that are more solid. But yeah, I do absolutely love Welsh folktales, as sad as they often are. And again, I think it's just, I love a story that tells me a rock is magical.
Now, I want you to use your imagination here for a minute, because, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, because this is really, really difficult, I understand. But pretend for a minute that I am a complete ignorant, thick, refraining not to swear, that I don't know anything at all about Welsh stories. So, how would you sum them up? Or is it possible to sum them up? Is there something within the body of folk tales in Wales that is a kind of a theme that's really important?
That's an incredibly tough question.
Yeah, I'm a complete shit.
Give me a moment to think. I'd say, well, we definitely have, a few genres. We've obviously got, maybe not obviously if you've never heard of them. We do have some big myths as well. We've got the 4 branches of the Mabinogion. I love them. They're insane. we're pretty sure that loads of fragments of those have been messed up and switched around. There's loads of plot holes and loads of stuff that doesn't make sense, but it's still beautiful. So you've got like big big magical things happening. You've got lots of stories about King Arthur. He's ours, by the way. I know that's contentious, but he is Welsh. He's linked in kind of through Merlin to some stories that explain why the Welsh flag is the Welsh flag. Not sure what more evidence you need. You've got stories which are just about dragons kicking about, doing stuff, getting in the way, eating people. You've got loads of giants, you've got witches, and then we've got a few Irish princesses fleeing to Wales and finding sanctuary. They're pretty cool. Loads of tragic lovers. Lots of stories where people die at the end.
I like those.
Yeah, quite a few magical animals of varying sizes and weird monsters, including my personal favourite, the Avanc, which directly translates to the beaver, that lived in the River Conwy, which is why I tell it all the time, because it's my river. Oh yeah, and then saints getting into arguments with the other world, and God being triumphant over them. Those are slightly later, and slightly younger stories than all of the gianty stuff and huge magical animal stuff, and a few witches which are probably actually goddesses and stuff like that. So yeah, I've not given you one thing; I've given you a whole lump of things. But those are my broad categories.
That's what I was kind of meaning, because I mean it's not just. There's one kind of story and that's it. You know, there are a whole pantheon of creatures, and but it's just sort of trying to kind of understand. So basically, it's very, very tied to the landscape, very tied to the land.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Same as here, because it's tied to the sea here as well, on the shore. But now, being a storyteller, I assume that you know a few stories.
I do have quite a few.
So I was wondering if you would share a few during the course of the chat tonight. Would you feel like
absolutely.
Any kind of favourite one? And I know that you also tell stories in Welsh. Delighted to have you tell in both languages.
I will definitely stick some Welsh in, yeah.
So... do you have a favourite story? So one that you really like to tell?
It's obviously, again, I think anybody who tells stories knows that it's super difficult to pick just one.
I only like one. I hate the rest of them.
The others are all rubbish. You only want to tell that favourite one.
Well, yeah. If there's any that you particularly like, I mean, I have one or two that I particularly love and like to tell. Because it has some meaning for me as well. But I just pick one randomly.
Well, I'll give you one of my go-tos, and it's one of my go-tos because it's quite gentle and it's quite mellow, and yeah, I just really love it. And it starts like this. Amser, maith and all. Once upon a time long, long ago, there lived an eagle. Erir Gwernabwy, the Eagle of Gwernabwy, and he sat high up in an oak canopy, perched on his branch, alone. Because you see, this eagle, his wife had died many, many winters ago. All of his chicks had left the nest. And he just wanted some company. He just wanted somebody that he could share some stories with and hear some stories in return. But the problem was, he was really, really old, and he did not want to marry a younger bird because, she'd probably wear him out and he'd probably bore her to tears. So he wanted to marry a bird who was older than he was. And he thought that maybe Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd, the owl of Cwm Cawlyd, might be older than him, but, Tom, it's very rude to ask a lady her age.
Oh, I never do that.
Especially, and it's really dangerous, actually, when the lady has super sharp talons. So he thought he'd go and ask one of his friends instead. A dyma'r eryr yn neidio I ffwrdd o'i cainc, and he flew through the air until he came to another beautiful oak woodland. And this oak woodland was the woodland of Rhedymfre. And he scanned through the canopy until he could see 2 antlers stretching up as if they were trying to touch the sun. And then he circled round, he swooped down, and he landed next to his friend. This huge stag standing on a slightly rotten oak stump. And he says, Carw, wyt ti'n gwybod pa mor hen yw Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd? Stag, do you know how old the Owl of Cwm Cawlyd is? A dyma'r Carw, the stag. He looks at the eagle and he says, Rydw i'n hen. I am old. Rydw I mor hen, I'm so old. And you see this stump I'm standing on? I remember watching a tiny little acorn fall from the top of the canopy, land in the ground, grow for 300 years, stand for 300 years, and synes for 300 more. Ac roedd Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd yn hen y tro cynta I mi cwrdd â hi. The Owl of Cwm Cawlyd, she was old when I met her for the very first time. But I have a friend who is older than me, Mwyalchen Cilgwri, the blackbird of the Wirral. Yes, I know the Wirral is technically in England now, but maybe that just tells you how old this story is. A dyma'r eryr yn neidio I fyny i'r awyr ac yn hedfan eto. He flies again until he comes to a birch woodland. And then he scans through the canopy again until he sees a tiny little black speck. And he swoops down. A dyna'r Mwyalchen, there's the blackbird, standing next to a tiny little pebble. Mwyalchen, wyt ti'n gwybod os yw Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd yn hen? Wyt ti'n gwybod pa mor hen yw hi? And the blackbird, he says, well, you see this little pebble by my claw, barely the size of a nut. I remember when it was a great boulder. It was so huge that it would take 100 men and 100 oxen to shift. But every single night, I tapped my beak against it, and every single morning, I rubbed it with my wing, and now it has been ground down to just a little pebble. Rydw I yn hen. I am old, ac roedd Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd yn hen pan cyrddais I â hi y tro cynta. She was old when I first met her, but I have a friend who is older than me. Roedd Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd yn hen y tro cynta I mi cwrdd â hi, ond mae gen I ffrind sydd yn hen, fwy hen na fi, a'i enw hi yw Eog Llynlliw. Diolch Mwyalchen. A dyma'r eryr yn neidio I fyny i'r awyr unwaith eto, a dyma fo'n hedfan. He flies again, away from the Wirral, away from this beautiful birch forest that has not been there for many, many years. And he flies until he sees underneath him a shining silver disc of a lake. Llynlliw. And he circles it and circles it and circles it until he finds a bit of the lake that glitters brighter than anything else. And right under that patch of glitter is the salmon herself, Eog Llynlliw. She is absolutely huge. She is the biggest salmon that has ever been or ever will be. And he lands at the edge of the lake next to her, and he says, Eog, wyt ti'n gwybod os yw Taliesan Cwm Cawlyd yn hen? And the salmon, she says, do you see how many scales are on my back and are on my belly? Do you know how many eggs are in my roe pouch? I have swam a year in this lake for every single one of those. And roedd Taliesan Cwmcawlyd yn hen pan cwrddais I â hi'r tro cynta. She was old the first time I met her when I was very young. Ond mae gen I ffrind, I have a friend, who is older than me. Ond mae gen I ffrind sydd yn fwy hen na fi. I have a friend who is even older than I am. Ac enw fo yw Ffion Phillips. And the eagle, who is very out of breath at this point, sighs and he says, diolch eog. A dyma fo'n neidio I fyny i'r awyr. He jumps up into the air again, a dyma fo'n hedfan. A hedfan, until the mountains give way to flat, boggy land, and he can see the rushes and tiny, yellow glints of Tormentil staring right back up at him. And he looks, and he looks, and he looks, searching through this dark bog until he sees 2 amber lights. And he knows that those are the eyes of the frog of Ffion. And he swoops down, and he's barely landed before this frog, who is so old that the skin almost seems to be hanging around his bones, said, Dwi'n gwybod pam wyt ti yma. I know why you're here. Rydw I yn hen. I am old. I am so old that I remember when this flat bog was covered in huge hills. I remember when in this very spot where I am sat, there was a hill so high it seemed to almost touch the clouds. But you see, I only eat dust. It's a very reasonable diet, Tom. I only eat dust. And every single morning, I eat half a mouthful of dust. And I have been here for so many mornings that I have eaten the entire hill, and the ground is totally flat. Ac, pan oeddwn i'n ifanc, cwrddais I at Taliesan Cwmcawlyd. When I was very young, I met the Owl of Cwmcawlyd, and she was old even then. Ydy, mae hi'n fwy hen na ti. Yes, she is older than you. Why don't you go and ask her to marry you? So, dyma'r eryr yn neidio I fyny i'r awyr ac yn hedfan unwaith eto. He flies until he comes to beautiful mountains once again. To the mountains of the Carneddau. To Cwmcawlyd. And a cwm is like a bowl made out of hills. And in the centre of that bowl there is normally a lake. And this lake is Llyn Cawlyd. And sat somewhere near Llyn Cawlyd is the owl, sat on a stone, all by herself, watching the waters of the lake. And you know, she'd really appreciate somebody to share stories with, and to hear some stories from in return. A dyma'r eryr. He lands next to her and he says, A wneud di fy mriodi? And at first, the owl is rather taken aback, but you know what? There isn't much else to do. She may as well. A dyma hi'n cytuno I priodi'r eryr. The wedding is arranged for the next day, and they hold it at Llyn Lliw so that the salmon can come. And all of the oldest animals in the world are there. And they sing, and they chat, and they share stories. But nobody dances, because they are all far too old for that. A dyna ni. There we go.
Thank you. So the owl got a toy boy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Significantly younger than her. I'm really not sure why he was just needed to be so certain that he needed to fly that far and ask that many people, but it was very important to him.
And if I come home the morning after work and discover that Rhonda's got my tea is like half a mouthful of dust, then you're in trouble. Love to hear the language. I know that like Tolkien was very influenced when he was making up his Elvish language. I mean, it was very inspired by Welsh.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to admit it has a really lovely sound. You get jibes all the time about oh, your language looks like a cat sat on a keyboard. And it's like, yeah, well, at least we spell things phonetically.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fun thing about Welsh. It's like impossible to get a spelling test wrong because once you know the alphabet, it's very consistent. It's very easy to read. I mean, you have to get the sh and ch sounds.
We can do that.
But you guys have already got ch.
Yep.
You say ach all the time.
Chlanded, no?
Yeah, perfect.
So, yeah. Oh, we know this.
Yeah, you know how it works.
We also know what it's like to have your language exterminated because that happened in Orkney. We had our own language. Norn was a dialect of Old Norse, which was it wasn't banned. It was starting to go into decline because when the Scots took over in 1468, we got pawned to Scotland on the marriage of King Christian I of Denmark. His daughter Margaret was marrying King James III of Scotland, and he found himself a bit tight for cash. Mm-hmm. So he pawned Orkney in 1468, and the following year Shetland was thrown into the mix as well. And seems he didn't pay back the cash. King James III annexed Orkney in 1472, I believe it was. And it's funny because Rhonda's eldest daughter was visiting once, and I was going on about that, moaning about it. Mm-hmm. And she said, when did that happen? I said, 1468. And she thought it was something that happened like 20 years ago. And I said, well, it might as well be as far as I'm concerned. But the church schools kind of finished it off because you were ridiculed. Well, you were beaten if you were using the language. And they did the same with the Irish, as they call it, Gaelic, in Scotland as well. So I guess you'll have stories in Wales about persecution, especially at school.
In schools, we had something, it's very famous. I think it's part of standard Welsh primary school education that you learn about it now, actually, it was called the Welsh Knot. And it's essentially a little wooden thing on a string that if a kid was speaking Welsh during school hours, they'd get the Welsh knot around their neck, and then whoever had it at the end of the day would get a caning. So yeah, you know, the Welsh language has been persecuted as well. And we don't have as many speakers as we'd like, but we're doing pretty okay, you know. I get all my student finance letters in Welsh. I had pretty much all of my education so far in Welsh. I even get to do a third of my uni course at Cardiff through Welsh. So I think there's still always going to be, you know, worries about the future of the language, seeing as we're such a small country and it is still a minority language. But I'd say the future looks okay.
Well, when you get people doing courses in Klingonese, then, you know, I mean, why not a real language? Yeah,
I mean, you can, any listeners interested in Welsh, you can check out the Welsh language course on Duolingo. I will warn you that it obviously, like any Duolingo course, it will teach you some interesting sentences which aren't super useful, as Ailsa discovered when she gave it a go, which is very sweet of her. My lovely Scottish storyteller partner. And it does mishmash dialects, South Wales and North Wales and Mid Wales. Obviously, as time goes on, we become more homogenized, but there are still like weird grammatical differences. Like I was talking to someone from Mid Wales a while ago and genuinely having to really rack my brains to figure out what he was saying. But yeah, there are plenty of online Welsh courses even. Like there's one that's free for 16 to 25-year-olds living anywhere in the UK. And it's just been, I think, I'm losing track of time up here. I think it's just been a Eisteddfod week. So the Eisteddfod essentially, or the National Eisteddfod, it's like a big cultural festival with loads of competitions in music and there's a bit of folk dance in there. loads of poetry, loads of new writing. Welsh has some really interesting history, poetry-wise. And it used to be, I think about 20 years ago, people who didn't speak Welsh found it quite hard to go to the Eisteddfod and to feel welcome. But there's an entire section of the Maes, of the grounds now, dedicated to Welsh learners. And it's very welcoming and it's very friendly. So we're pretty cool. Check us out.
Mm. So you're saying about, the dialect is different from the South and Mid Wales, from North Wales, but it is just a dialect. There is no other languages in there.
Yeah, it's very much, you can still understand what's being said. Mm-hmm. And there are grammatical differences. But the extent of the difference is that when you do a national reading tests, which, all primary school kids have to do in Wales, and I think up to year 9 in secondary, there'd sometimes be a little asterisk at the bottom of the page explaining what a word meant if the text was from South Wales, to make sure that the North Walian kids would understand what was going on.
Okay.
But it is still all one language, yeah.
Because, people think that everybody in Scotland spoke Gaelic. Or, like I said, the church schools used to call it Irish because it came from Ireland originally, from the Kingdom of Dalriada in the west coast and Western Isles in Scotland. But, of course, there was all these different ethnic groups, from Vikings up north, Picts, around sort of Inverness and Anglo-Saxons in the lowlands, and also the Britannic, the kingdom of based around Dumbarton Rock and Clydeside, was basically a Welsh-speaking area in Scotland.
There is. I always find it very funny finding place names that just sound like Welsh place names in Scotland. Very, very noticeably, Aberdeen, Aber, is the same word that we have for the mouth of a river or for the estuary.
Mm-hmm. It's it's one of these things when people talk about nationalism as being one, like we are one nation, one people kind of thing. Never was.
Oh, yeah.
Never has been, You've got different ethnic groups kicking the shit out of each other. The whole concept of a country is modern, really. But I remember we were having a wee chat the other day, and the C word was used, Celtic, which kind of made you go a bit prickly, which I thought was amusing.
Well, the reason that I got a bit prickly is when people talk about Celtic myth, but kind of forget that Wales exists. Mm-hmm. It was somebody described like the salmon of knowledge as being the cornerstone of Celtic myth at some point, and that bugs me as a Welsh girl, because it's not even the coolest, whoops, I accidentally had a drop of this thing I was meant to be cooking for someone else, and now I have all the knowledge and wisdom in the world. Like, it's not even the coolest version of that. In my personal opinion, I'm definitely much more of a fan of Taliesan. But I would be, because in some versions of the story, things happen around my valley. So we've already talked about that.
And I actually, I quite like Sigurd, the dragon slayer that killed Fafnir. And then Fafnir's brother, Regan, says, roast the heart for me, but don't you have any of it now. I'm just going to have a sleep. And it's like, what could possibly go wrong? And it's the same thing. He pokes the heart and some of the blood comes out and burns his finger, and he puts it in his mouth, and then is able to understand the words of the language of the birds and the trees who are saying, ha ha ha, Regan's going to kill him when he wakes up. And,
that's
and so
so
then
cool.
He does him in first while he's still asleep, so he can't kill him. And that's what he told the judge anyway. And so off he went. But yeah, I mean, that whole kind of, the salmon and knowledge, cooking over the fire, and the skin blisters and you poke it, and the juice runs on the finger and burns it. And all. it is something that is recurring in different cultures, right enough.
Yeah.
And but I mean, Celtic, it's such a misused term. I mean, the Celts were originally Central European, and people did come across. I mean, the artwork and such like is very similar, but it's just become a kind of an overall kind of blanket term.
Yeah, and I've not got a problem at all with, I think it's really beautiful when you can have unity between, the Celtic nations.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been Gaelic spoken on at the Eisteddfod this year, which was pretty cool. And I love the cultural similarities for sure. What I don't like is when it's used as a blanket term in a way that sort of loses the beautiful nuances and the differences between these different cultures and these different languages. Because, while we have got lots of similarities and lots of commonalities, with the motifs that we've got in stories and myths, we are all our own thing.
Yeah. But, no, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, unity is the way to go. But it is just rather misleading when it's just one blanket term for what is supposed to be a people, but actually it's like
loads of people,
lots and lots of different separate kind of peoples with their own cultures and languages and such like as well. But it just gets all chucked into one basket.
Yeah. What I find really funny as well is in gift shops how there's like a generic Celtic font that people tend to use.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I found it really funny when I went to Edinburgh for the first time, seeing all the gift shop things as being like the exact same font that I see in all the gift shops at home, except instead of sheep it was Highland cows. That really made me laugh.
That's how Celtic people write,
It's how Celtic people write. Yeah, absolutely. We've not got different languages at all.
Mm-hmm.
We just all select that font, whatever it's called, in Word when we type.
Mm-hmm. It's like sort of newsprint and in Germany in the 1930s was all that sort of heavy Gothic kind of thing. It's drawing from the past, I suppose, to try to like rebrand what people are meant to think your country is like or how you want it to be. It's all very misleading though, and much abused.
Yeah.
Would you have another story up your sleeve?
I would have another story up my sleeve. I mean, I could do Taliesan, seeing as we were just talking about that.
Yeah. We should probably mention about where that comes from. But I suppose we could tell the story first and then talk about Mabinogion and such like. But yeah.
It's kind of like a bit standalone compared to the branches. They were just all sort of in the same book, packet, clump.
Well, I would love to hear this.
This is one of my absolute favourite stories. And it starts by Llyn Tegid in a place called Bala, a place that we sold some cows to recently. So that's my link this time. In a little place called Bala. And Llyn Tegid is named after a nobleman called Tegid Foel, Bald Tegid, so we can assume that he had a wonderful head full of hair. But we actually aren't bothered about this nobleman at all right now. We are bothered about his wife, Ceridwen. And that name means like sacred love. And you can describe her in many ways. Maybe she's a sorceress. Maybe she's a wise woman. Maybe she's a Swynraig. Maybe she's a goddess. And she has this absolutely beautiful daughter called Ceridwen. And Ceridwen, she is a teenager and she is shaping up to be a fine magician. She's got a bright future ahead of her. Oh, and Ceridwen's also got this son. His name's Morfran, which means sea crow. But most of the time, to be honest, she calls him a Vagthi, which is really mean, actually, because that means utter darkness. And the problem with him is that, first of all, he has no magic at all, which is fine. You know, you can't expect all of your children to be born with magic, even if you are a sorceress. But he doesn't really have much interest in anything. He doesn't really have many skills. He's got a huge attitude problem, and unlike Credwi, he has a bit of an unfortunate face. He's got a bit of a wonky nose, perpetually greasy hair, and a permanent frown on his face. And Ceridwen loves him. Of course she does. She absolutely loves him, and that is why she's worried. Because she knows that at this rate, he isn't really going to make something of himself in the same way that Credwi will. So she decides that she's going to give her son a gift. And she will brew up a potion for him that will grant him wisdom, magic, and awen, bardas, inspiration. The ability to compose the most beautiful poetry, the most wonderful stories. This is going to be quite the undertaking. It's going to take a year and a day of her time, so she finds herself 2 helpers. The first is a blind man called Morda. His job will be to stoke the fire for her cauldron. He's blind because nobody else must see the roots, the shoots, the flowers, any of the ingredients that she is putting into this cauldron. And the second is a boy called Guillaume Bach, Little Guillaume, so called because he is so short. His job is to stir the cauldron, and crucially, he is too short to see into it. So, she sets Morda and Gwion up in a glade with the cauldron. And for a year and a day, she scrambles around Wales, picking the ingredients that she needs at the exact right moments of the exact right days before running back to the cauldron as quickly as she can to put them in when the moon is just right or the stars are in perfect alignment. And as she quests around finding the ingredients that she needs for this potion for her son, Morda stokes the fire. A dyma Gwion yn cymysgu, a cymysgu, a cymysgu. He mixes, a cymysgu, and he mixes, a cymysgu, and it is so boring. It is so repetitive that it isn't long before his mind wanders far, far away from the cauldron and far, far away from his body. And he has the most incredible daydreams as he stirs. A dyma'r amser yn pasio. The time passes. Haf I hydref, hydref I gaeaf, gaeaf I Gwanwyn, Gwanwyn I haf unwaith eto. The seasons pass. A year is up. And there is just one day left to go. And Ceridwen is somewhere far away from the cauldron. And Gwion's mind is far, far away from his body. And he hasn't noticed that the potion he's stirring has got very, very thick by now. Very, very thick by now. And he hasn't noticed that Morda is stoking the fire slightly too hot, and there is a bubble forming at the very bottom of the cauldron. Just swig bychan. Ond dyma fo'n tyfu. A tyfu. A tyfu. A tyfu. A tyfu. A tyfu. A tyfu. Until pop, the bubble gets so big that it bursts, and 3 searing drops of liquid fly through the air out of the cauldron, and one of them lands right on Gwion's thumb. And before he can even think, he's put his thumb in his mouth, and he's swallowed that drop of potion. And Tom, you know what that means. He can understand the language of the birds. He knows what the trees are saying to each other. He has all of these lines of poetry flying through his mind. He knows so much magic. He knows so much, and he knows that Ceridwen knows what has happened, and that she is going to tear him to shreds if she catches him. And so He takes off. Dyma fo'n rhedeg. I ffwrdd mor gyflym ag y fedrai o. He runs and he runs and he runs away from the cauldron as fast as his little legs, which are full of pins and needles by now, can carry him. And it isn't long before he can hear Ceridwen's heavy footsteps on the ground behind him. But, of course, he has all this wisdom now. He has all of this magic. A dyma fo'n trawsffurfio. O hogyn I sgwarnog. From boy to hare. And he is so fast. He is tearing through the long grass. He is leaving Ceridwen miles behind him until, of course, she has magic too. A dyma hi'n trawsffurfio. O ddynes I ast. From woman to hound. And it isn't long before that little hare can feel the dog's hot breath on his little tail. But in front of him, he can see cool water, a wide, rushing river, and that little hare, dyma fo'n neidio I fyny i'r awyr. It leaps up into the sky, a dyma fo'n trawsffurfio. Sgwarnog I eog. Hare to salmon. He plunges into the cool water, feels it over his silver scales, and tries his best to hide in and amongst the silt, but it isn't long before ast I dyfrgi. Hound to otter, and it isn't long before that salmon can feel the otter's claws moving closer and closer towards his tail, and so he leaps out of the water into the sunlight. A dyma fo'n trawsffurfio unwaith eto. Eog I aderyn. Salmon to songbird. A little lark that flies higher and higher and higher and higher, leaving the river as a little ribbon underneath him. Ond wrth gwrs, dyma Ceridwen yn trawsffurfio hefyd. Dyfrgi I eryr. Otter to eagle. And the eagle, well, the lark is fast, but the eagle is faster. And the eagle is getting higher and higher and higher. And Gwion begins to panic because now he has run out of places to run to, but he sees underneath him a farmyard. And he can see a pile of grain. A huge pile of grain, and he thinks, well, if he can't run, maybe he can hide. And as those talons close around him, dyma fo'n trawsffurfio. Aderyn I wenydd. He turns into a tiny little grain of wheat, and he falls through the sky into the pile, and he is safe. Until the eagle figures out where he has gone. And she slowly glides down to the ground. A dyma hi'n trawsffurfio. Eryr I iar. She turns into this big black hen, and she starts to peck and peck and peck until she has eaten every last grain in that farmyard, including Gwion. A dyma hi'n trawsffurfio unwaith eto. Iar I ddynes. And she thinks that is the end of that. And she goes home, and she goes about her business, and she tries her best to forget about the entire year and a day of her life that she has wasted on this potion that Morfran didn't even get to see. And then she starts feeling pretty weird. Really weird. And she has felt this weird twice before. And she is pretty certain that she is pregnant. And the horrible realization dawns on her that that piece of grain has stayed inside of her and it has started to grow. And she is absolutely furious. You're kidding, this boy has stolen a year and a day from her, and now he's going to steal another 9 months? She is so angry. She is dreaming up hundreds of ways that she is going to dispose of this child once he's back into this world. But of course, when this child is born, her name translates to sacred love. she can't stay angry at him for what he'd done in his previous life. And her heart does swell with love. But she knows that she can't keep him. Where on earth would he fit in with Tegid and Creirwy and Morfran and with her? And she looks at this child with his beautiful, shining brow, because, of course, this potion has made him beautiful too. And then she comes up with an idea. She lays him down gently at the side of her hearth, and she takes a pile of crane skins that Tegid had brought her, and she starts to sew them together into a bag. And then she places the baby inside, and she takes him down to the Conwy estuary, and lays the bag into the water, gives it the gentlest push, and watches as the waves carry it away. And this new baby, he isn't Gwion anymore, is carried out to sea. And he stays being rocked by the waves, totally silent, not crying, not moving, not needing to eat, just listening to the waves, to the stories they bring, of mermaids and kelpies and selkies rushing down from other parts of Prydain. Listens to stories of giants and knights streaming in from all of the rivers that feed into the ocean. Stays there in that bag for 40 years until he is washed back up the estuary. The bag covered in seaweed and barnacles until it comes to a stop in a net. And this net just so happens to belong to Prince Elfin, who comes riding on his horse to see if he has caught any salmon. And then, as he's pulling in this net, which is much heavier than usual, the baby in the bag begins to cry. And he pulls the net in faster. A dyma fo'n cymryd ei cyllell, he takes his knife, because he's spotted that this weird rock has stitching in the top of it. A dyma fo'n dechrau torri, he starts to cut through these stitches as careful as he can, and the bag is opened to reveal a shining brow. Taliesan. That's what he names the child. He scoops the baby out, and the baby begins to speak. Starting with a poem, then a story, then another poem, then another story, then a story that goes on for an entire hour, and Elfin just stands there awestruck with this child in his arms until the sun begins to set. And he takes the baby, he takes Taliesin onto the back of his horse, and together they ride out of this story and into so many others. Adanani, there we go.
Fabulous. Absolutely bloody marvellous. When I was your age, I was just like scooping back whiskey and listening to punk. It's kind of... I'm amazed.
Thank you.
That is a really, really powerful telling of an ancient tale, and so beautifully done. So for all our listeners out there, let's just pretend for a minute that they don't know anything about this either. But would you like to say a bit about where that comes from, and just tell us about it?
So I know that it is found with the Mabinogion. I can't remember exactly what the name of the book it was found in. But essentially it was just kicking about in a pile of old manuscripts that eventually were translated.
There you go.
Yeah, translated by Lady Charlotte Guest into English. But I think to the best I can remember, they were just kicking about in an old farmhouse. And I think they were, these stories, they were still existing in the oral tradition, but being translated into English obviously gave them a much bigger audience. And there are, plenty of poems and fragments of poems which are attributed to an actual historical Taliesin. Whether or not these were the circumstances of his birth, I'm not qualified to comment on. Personally, I think that the story is totally true.
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes families are complicated,
Yeah. They'd be on the Cherry Springer show. Might be his date now.
Yeah. Oh, God. Is this the baby you found in a bag? Yeah. And there are other stories about Prince Elfin. He behaves like an absolute moron. He does some really stupid things. Brags to King Maelgwyn of Gwynedd, I think, and then ends up locked in a cellar. And then it's up to Taliesin, who Elfin is also his patron. It's up to Taliesin to save him with various magic and trickery. But yeah, I think Taliesin's a great character, and I love this story so much. I know that so many other people love it as well. Loads of visual artists have done some really brilliant things with the animal chase sequence. I mean, what's not to love?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's brilliant. I was just digging out one of my copies of Mabinogion off the shelf there. But can you tell us a little bit about Mabinogion?
So, again, I am not a scholar on the Mabinogion. I am a random 19-year-old who likes telling stories, but I love these stories so much. I was first introduced to them through Mererid Hopwood's Mabinogion for Children book, which is in Welsh, with beautiful illustrations by Brett Brecon. She's currently the prifard, so that the head bard of the Orsedd, which is like the council in charge of the National Eisteddfod. So I was first introduced to slightly more child-friendly versions, still absolutely as bloody, slightly less sexual assault, slightly more simplified characters. And when I heard them properly for the first time in the Welsh scene, I was absolutely awestruck. And I think I memorised them fully just from hearing them from each of those tellings. But yeah, I love them so much. It's to the best of my knowledge, I think they're meant to be. So Mabinogion sort of suggests that these are like stories for young men. You've got only one character who's in all of the branches. His name is Pryderi. He's named after his mother's worry, because his mother, Rhiannon, suffers years of terrible punishment while Pryderi is missing as a child. The midwives blamed Rhiannon and claimed that she ate her baby, which is totally reasonable. It's a thing that definitely makes sense.
Well, cats do it, so.
Cats do it. Maybe women from the other world also eat their children.
Who knows? Let's
not ask her. And yeah, it's Pryderi is the through line, I suppose. He appears in every single branch. Then he dies just out of nowhere in the fourth branch. There is magic. There is chaos. People are going in and out of Annwn, the other world. Sometimes through like specific castles, sometimes seemingly by accident. There is so much bloodshed. I don't know what the death count is. The second branch claims at one point that like everyone in Ireland was killed. I'm not sure if Ireland can verify if they had anyone left. That's quite funny actually. In the second branch, there is an Irish king called Matholwch. Ireland do not seem to have a king called Matholwch at any point. He seems to be just some guy, I guess, who just showed up in Britain and said he was a king. Don't know what's up with that. I'm waffling because it's very hard to summarise the Mabinogion. I summarised the first branch to Ailsa while we were on Ede, or is it Ede?
Eddie.
Eddie?
Mm-hmm.
That's me told.
Isthmus Island. Not Christmas Island, Isthmus Island.
Isthmus
It's got a little pinch in the middle. There's a little isthmus.
Ah, yeah. I was wanting to explain all 4 branches to her. I only got through the first before her head exploded. I know, it's very convoluted. She's over in the corner with her head in hands. But I love them. They're insane, they're full of magic, they're full of blood, and they are deeply tragic at times. The women of the Mabinogion have a terrible time of it, generally. And lots of the stories have real themes of the human world and the other world, and men and women getting out of balance, and then strange, tragic cascades of events spiral out from there.
Mm-hmm. It's fabulous stuff. I was just saying in the car on the way over here that, it's been quite a few years since I've read that, and that's got to be on the winter reading list. Because, the stories are just fabulous. And, as far as I can remember, they were written in the 12th century by a monk, who was supposed to be writing scriptures, but then on his spare time was writing down the legends from his own country. And that's where they came from. Now, I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that, but lots of people, say that these stories have been kicking about for a long time.
Oh yeah, they were ancient. No, they were ancient when he wrote them down, but he just put them into writing where they were preserved.
Yeah, there are some chunks of the Mabinogion, like there's this character called Lle Llawgyffes, which means Slay of the Quick Hand. He has a weird name because his mum put a tongued on him. A tongued is like a fate. It's like a condition that's in charge of your life. Put a condition on him that he would never have a name unless she named him, and she wasn't going to, because he was born in a ridiculous way. And then his uncle Gwydion tricked Llei's mother into giving him a name, which is why it's silly. I can't remember the thread of the start of a sentence, or where I was going with that at all. The circumstances of Llei's death, the only way that he can be killed, are so weird that there are some people who reckon that was just changed by the monk. He's got to have his one foot on a goat and 1 foot in a trough and be sort of inside but sort of outside. So have like a weird lean-to built over his head. Nobody knows what's going on with that.
There's
but it's there.
Yeah, it's a Norwegian folktale that's has a similar thing in it, where the woman who loves this man is told that she has to come to him, not walking but not riding, and not naked but not clothed, and not.
Is it not day but not night in that one as well?
And I think there was a fasting
that
thing in it as well, where she wasn't fasting but she wasn't full, and all. So she has like a grain of corn, so she's not fasting, but it hasn't done much for the appetite. Dresses herself in a net, and then gets on the back of I
think it's a goat. Is
goat,
it? Yeah. Certainly not riding.
And then it sort of like drags her along, because she's sitting on its back, but her feet are on the ground, so she's not actually riding it, but she's not walking either. So that's a similar kind of a thing to that.
Yeah, I had come across that as well. I'm not sure where. There was a really funny illustration with it of just the net and the goat. The goat looks really unhappy in it. Yeah.
I've got a book behind me as well of Asbjørnsen and Moe, Folktales from Norway, which has got an illustration of that in it. So that might be the one, because it's kind of well-known image. But there's also a guy that turns up in the Mabinogion as well for, I believe, possibly the first time in written literature, a certain king that you claimed for Wales.
Bendigeidfran?
Arthur.
Oh, Arthur, yeah. Arthur, sorry, my mistake. Arthur I can see you laughing at me in the corner, Esther. Yes, Arthur. He's 100% ours. Yeah, Arthur does show up there. He also digs up a different king who is a giant. He digs up Bendigeidfran's head, which I think is a mistake. But hey, Arthur was of the opinion that the giants shouldn't control what people are doing anymore and that people should make their own destiny. So, yeah, fair enough.
So the giants have some sort of say in people's destiny?
Yeah, the giants had a say in people's destiny because, I mean, Bendigeidfran was a giant and he was meant to be king of all of Britain. Not sure if Scotland agrees with that, but hey-o. And then when he died, his severed head was still alive and went to some feasts for a while until somebody opened a door they weren't meant to have opened. So then Bendigeidfran died, but they buried his head under the Tower of London, or near the Tower of London, which is meant to be why there are so many ravens or crows. Fran, Bran, that's crow, or Cigfran is raven. But anyway, the point of his head being there was it was meant to protect us all. But then Arthur was on his getting rid of giants spree because they were interfering too much in the lives of people and dug that head up too. Which makes total sense.
Absolutely. Because that's sort of like one of the first, if not the first, reference to Merlin in there as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about the Welsh flag.
Yes. That is also a crazy story. It technically has two parts. There's like a few hundred years gap in the middle. But I guess I could skip part one because otherwise I will actually keep you here all night.
Well, I'm not doing anything, but I mean, you do whatever you wish, whatever you feel comfortable with, obviously.
Okay, so we've got a king, and his name is Vortigern. And Vortigern is having a pretty bad time with the Anglo-Saxons, not doing very well, keeps losing. And so he takes advantage of one of Wales's greatest assets when you're losing terribly, which is the mountains, because the Anglo-Saxons can't deal with them and you can hide in them pretty well. And after a couple of weeks of hiding out in his tent, he decides that he would like to have a proper tower, a proper castle. So he sends for some builders and he shows them the spot where he wants his tower to be built, and they draw up some plans, and he looks at the plans and says the plans look okay, and then they start building. And they've made pretty good progress on day one, and then everyone goes to bed. And then in the morning they go to continue building on the tower, and there is no tower, but there is a pile of rubble. So the builders, they go up to Vortigern and they inform him that his lovely tower has fallen down and is now a pile of stones. And he is so furious that he has them all executed. And he gets a whole fresh batch of builders. And he tells them where he wants the tower, a dyma nhw'n mynd I ffwrdd, a darlunio, a dod I fyny hefo tŵr newydd, a dyma fo'n cytuno, dyma'r tŵr mae o isio, a dyma nhw'n dechrau adeiladu. A wedyn maen nhw'n mynd I gysgu. A'r bore wedyn, the next morning, there is no tower, there is a pile of rubble, so he has them executed, he gets a whole fresh batch of builders, a dyma nhw'n darlunio tŵr newydd, a dechrau adeiladu'r tŵr, a wedyn maen nhw'n mynd i'r gwely, ac yn y bore, does dim tŵr, there is no tower, there is a pile of rubble. And Vortigern at this point is running out of builders, so he goes to his wise men and he says, Be diawl sy'n mynd ymlaen yn fan hyn? Dwi angen tŵr, dwi eisiau adeiladu tŵr. Pam bod o'n disgyn I lawr? Pob diwrnod. Be sy'n mynd ymlaen? I want this tower built here. I need you to come up with a solution for me so that it stops falling down. And the wise men, they go away and they chat amongst themselves and they realise they have got no idea what to do about this. And Vortigern cannot be persuaded to build his tower in a different spot. So they put their heads together and they think, okay, let's come up with something that he won't be able to do. Then it won't be our fault that the tower keeps falling down. It'll be that Vortigern isn't able to fix it, even though we've given him all the information. So they come up with this. What you need to do, Vortigern, is you need to find a boy who has never had a father. Not a boy whose father disappeared before he was born, not a bastard, not a boy whose father has died. A boy who never had a father at all. And then you need to bring him to the spot where your tower keeps falling down, and then sacrifice him, and then you can build your tower. And I think the council are expecting that Vortigern will just give up, but he doesn't give up. Instead, he sends out riders to every corner of Wales to find a boy who never had a father. And it's a futile endeavour. They find lots of boys whose fathers were sailors. They find lots of boys whose fathers were soldiers lost to war. Not a boy who never had a father until one of these riders comes across a group of boys playing football, or something similar to football. Either way, they're kicking around an inflated pig bladder. And he watches them for a while, and then he sees a shorter boy with raven black hair and green eyes rush up and try and join in with the game. And they chase him away. And they say, "Dos I ffwrdd Emrys, go away, Merlin, you've never even had a father." Thinks, weird taunt, but that's exactly what I'm looking for. So he gets off his horse and he follows this boy until the boy comes to a nunnery. And he knocks at the door, and he asks to take this to the very top, and he asks if it's true that this boy never had a father at all. And he's told that this boy's father was a spirit who appeared in the night, and he thinks, well, that seems to fit the bill. So he shows his ring from the king. He tells the boy's mother, one of the nuns, what he must do. And there's not really anything she can do to stop the order of King Vortigern. So tearfully she hugs her son, kisses him on the cheek, and watches as he leaves on the back of this strange horse with this strange man to go off to a very strange and sticky fate. But Merlin is pretty unfazed. He's chatting away with the rider, who's feeling ever more uncomfortable as the miles pass by. And when they get to the site of all the rubble, and Merlin, this boy, is brought in front of Vortigern, he tells the king, "Os wyt ti'n lladd fi, fydd dim byd yn newid, a fydda ti byth yn gwybod y gwir. If you kill me, nothing will change, your tower will keep falling down, and you will never know what is causing it. But I can tell you. Don't you want to know?" And the king thinks he'll give it a shot, so he asks this strange raven-haired boy, what's going on? And he says, "Os wyt ti'n palu fan hyn, fydda ti'n dod o hyd I llyn. If you dig right here, you will find a lake, and if you don't believe me, get digging." So they get digging. All of the men, all of the people at the king's disposal arrive with shovels, and they dig and they dig and they dig for hours, wiping the sweat from their brows until somebody sees the sky, the clouds, reflecting back at him. There is indeed a lake. And they uncover it. And they're amazed, because what does this boy know about anything? But now they want to listen to whatever else he's got to say. So he says, "Os ydych chi gyd yn cael gwared o'r llyn, fyddwch chi'n gweld carreg llyfn. If you get rid of this lake, if you drain it, you will see a flat stone, and if you don't believe me, get draining." So they form a line of buckets, and they finally drain this lake. and they see a flat stone. And Merlin says, Oes unrhyw un arall yn gwybod beth sydd o dan y carreg? Does anybody else know what's under the stone? And everyone shakes their heads, and he says, Os ydych chi yn tynnu'r carreg yma o'r pridd, fyddwch chi'n gweld dau draig yn cysgu. They say, what? He says, if you lift this stone, you will see 2 sleeping dragons. And so they do lift the stone, and they see these 2 sleeping dragons surrounded by some rusted chain and a shredded white sheet. And the dragons, they open their eyes, and they look at each other. One red, one white. And the white dragon begins to snap, and the red dragon begins to snarl, and they take off into the sky, and they begin to fight. Claw meets wing, tooth meets leg. There is fire filling the skies. The smell of smoke is so strong that even the king is gagging. And everyone watches as these 2 huge beasts battle for hours and hours and hours. A dyma Vortigern yn edrych ar Merlin. And he says, okay, have you got anything else you want to tell me about these dragons? And Merlin says, that red dragon, she is the dragon of the Welsh. And that white dragon, she is the dragon of the Saxons. And these 2 dragons have been sleeping under here for hundreds of years, but the past few nights they have started to wake up, and they have seen each other, and they have started to fight. And that is the vibration, that is the earthquake that has been causing your tower to fall down over and over again. And they watch as the red dragon, wounded, slinks away and falls back behind the hills. And the white dragon, wounded too, but looking slightly stronger, flies off in the opposite direction. And Merlin says, the red dragon, she is the dragon of the Welsh. And though she is injured right now, when we need her the most, she will come back and she will defend us. And one day that white dragon will be defeated. But for now, Vortigern, you can build your tower, and you can be sure that it won't fall down. And he says a whole load of other prophetic things which I do not have memorised. But he sees far into the future. He sees all kinds of weird and wonderful things that nobody around him understands. And that place where Vortigern tries to build his tower is called Dinas Emrys, which is another one of Merlin's names, or the name of his father, or I think maybe both. And there are beautiful ruins there today. And there is a red dragon on the Welsh flag. And a whole other weird backstory with strange scourges hundreds of years prior that leads to these dragons being put under the ground in the first place, although they have to be pried with an entire giant cauldron's worth of, well, actually all the alcohol in Wales. They had to make some sort of terrible cocktail where they've just commandeered everyone's booze and poured it in.
Sounds like a cog.
Yeah, that's what they had to use. But yeah, it was so strong that these dragons stayed asleep enough to be bound up in chains and wrapped in a white sheet and put under the ground. And so strong that it took them a couple of 100 years to come round.
Yeah, it does sound like a cock. A drink we have at weddings, which is basically you get all the booze and pour it into a pot and heat it up. Right.
Sounds exactly the same, but maybe on a slightly smaller scale.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Unless you can drink as much of it as a dragon, in which case I think I'd be quite impressed and maybe a little bit scared.
Do my best. And these stories are just, because these are epic, ancient myths.
They're so cool.
And I mean epic is in the actual true meaning of the word. Folktales. So what kind of creatures do you have? Because, I mean, here we've got trolls, fairies. We've got fin folk that live in the sea, mermaids, selkie folk. We've got the odd passing giant. Don't see many of them these days, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got our fair share of giants, and we have the fair folk. We have a Tylwyth Teg. They can be, we've got there's an expression in Wales that people still use all the time, or people's grandmothers do anyway, where whenever anything like remotely goes wrong or someone's being ridiculous, you just go, bobl bach, which just means, little people. So yeah, still blaming things on the Tylwyth Teg. I had that phrase thrown at me so many times in primary school because I was forever zoning out. Just like, bobl bach. Did you dial heb Godfriend? You've still not finished. So we've got the Tylwyth Teg. We've got small scale dragons, who aren't, epic and don't prophesize anything, but just eat sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Or we've got one quite funny one. We've got the Gwyber, which is sort of like more of a serpenty, not your traditional Welsh dragon, more serpenty, green, steals milk. So while that was still an issue in Gwybernant, a place named after the Gwyber, just like Gwyber Stream, people would occasionally find this dragon drinking milk directly from their cows. So that was pretty annoying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think similar to other places, we have giants building things and getting into arguments and dropping big stones in the landscape.
Yeah, we've got a few of those as well here.
Getting into arguments. There was a giant on my side of the valley called Ivan Goch, because he had a red beard. Goch is red. Kept getting into arguments with this other giant, Idris. So the boulders they threw at each other are still visible today.
Oh.
Yeah, and then, of course, like so many other places where you've got good musicians, we did have a problem for a while of harpists ending up, going into a fairy mound, playing for a night. Whoops, it was not a night, it was a couple 100 years.
We have that here too, but it's fiddle players.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking maybe it happens more up here because fiddles are a bit more portable than harps. So
it's the tradition, really,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, when I was recording Tales for Troubled Times, which was sort of just recording folk tales during lockdown as a way of trying to kind of help people get through the day, I recorded a version of a Welsh story for a friend of mine who is of Welsh extraction, who told me that I got all the pronunciations totally, which, I mean, I was fully expecting, But it was a guy that had got a harp from the fairy folk.
Ah, yes, I love this one.
You know that one? Do you actually know it well enough to tell it?
I might do. Is this the one where he then is an arse with it and gets it? Yeah, I do know that. The other thing I've left out is that sometimes we've got a big thing of magical cows as well, which often come from the fairy folk. And sometimes there is intermarriage between the Tylwyth Teg and the humans, which normally ends really sadly, with a woman returning back to a lake with her cattle, varying, promises broken. Sometimes the farmer she married it's an honest mistake. Sometimes he was just being an arse. There are two lakes right next to each other. One's called Llyn y Forwyn, one's called Llyn y Fan Fach. The ladies of the lake from these two lakes are very different, and their husbands are very different, but the stories get mishmashed together all the time. But word of advice, Tom, don't go to Llyn y Forwyn, because Nelferch, the fairy woman who married a human man, is still dead against all human men now, because in their case, the promise he was not to break was that he was not to disrespect her, and the final straw was that he sold her favourite cow, and she had brought all of her cattle with her out of the lake to join his herd, sold her favourite cow without even asking. So she was off, calling for her cattle, which all followed, including the one that had been sold to a random farm a couple of miles away. But yeah, she's still around Llyn skulking about.
We have similar stories here. The cattle are usually blue when they come from the sea.
Ooh, sea cattle.
Finn folk have a herd of blue cattle that live on the islands that float on the surface of the sea, Hildeland.
Wow.
And there was a story from North Ronaldsay where cow comes from the sea and then has wonderful offspring and gives amazing amounts of wonderful milk. And then one day they hear a voice from the sea saying, "Brak the band borrow and tak with thee all thee storrow." So the cow, which is called Borrow, breaks her band and takes all her store, all her offspring with her, and they go back into the sea.
Wow.
But yeah, so I am kind of
similar cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now this story I was referring to before, I had recorded that, and I've been working recently with Liz Tulloch from Shetland, Storyteller up there, whose dad, Lawrence Tulloch, was a great, I don't like using the word tradition bearer, but on this occasion it is justified. You know, he was the person that held the stories of his people, and he learnt them from his dad, who learnt them from his mother, who learnt them from her dad, and all the way back. And me and Lawrence used to travel around together and do a lot of storytelling all over the world. And but sadly, he died in 2017. And now his daughter Liz, who is also a fabulous fiddle player, is now telling stories.
Brilliant.
And the very first story that she told in public was that one. Because she'd heard me, you know, on the Tales of Troubled Times. She liked it, so she took it and set it in Shetland and turned the harp into a fiddle.
Of course it would be a fiddle, yeah.
So, but I was just quite amazed that, you know, the way that these stories go around. But it is a good story, so if you would like to share it.
Yeah, I'll give it a crack. It is quite a simple one. I'm not sure exactly where this one comes from, actually, so I'm breaking my own rules of knowing exactly where stuff comes from. I'm fairly sure it's set in South Wales, but somewhere in South Wales there was a man, and unlike much of the Welsh, he did not have the song. He did not have the power of the land of song running through his veins. He was maybe the worst singer. He was dreadful. Oh my God, he was so bad. They wouldn't even let him sing a single note in the choir. If he started humming, all of the birds would fly up from their branches and into the sky. If he started singing in the garden, all of his neighbours, they would head back inside. But he loved music, and he wished that he could sing or play an instrument, and he wished that he could be, you know, properly part of the music traditions in Wales. Just once, he would love to be able to show up to the village Eisteddfod and actually be allowed on the stage. And one day, there was some people that he didn't recognise passing through his village. They were travelling about, and it was horrible weather outside, and they asked if they could just come in and have some food. So he opened the door to them, and he let them in, and he gave them some cow, some hot soup. And they started talking about this and that, and they were telling him about, you know, where they'd been and complaining about the weather, because that's always good small talk. And he was talking about the Eisteddfod that was coming up next week, and about this one old guy who wouldn't let him do anything last year and said that he was the worst singer that had ever lived. And you know, these people, they were agreeing that that was pretty hurtful and that he couldn't be that bad. And then he offered to sing for them, and they said that they were okay, thanks, they didn't need to hear it. They had a lovely little afternoon together, and once the weather had cleared up and they were ready to go on their way, he realised that these strange people were bobl bach. They were little people, slightly shorter than average. They were part of the Tylwyth Teg, part of the fair folk. And they said that to thank him for his generosity, he could have anything he wanted. They would give him one wish. Nawn ni rhoi ti be bynnag wyt ti isio, just dweda'r gair, air, gwartheg, cegin well, anything at all, we will give it to you. And of course, he just wants to be part of the music, so he asks for delyn. Gai delyn. Dyna gyd dwi isio telyn, ond nid telyn arferol. Dwi isio offeryn, lle dim os pa mor wael ydw i'n ei chwarae, mae'r cerddoriaeth bob amser yn hyfryd, yn perffaith. And so, they snap their fingers, and in front of him, it's exactly what he asked for. A beautiful harp with gorgeous carvings all over it, and no matter how badly somebody plays it, it will always produce the most beautiful music. And he doesn't see them again. For a time, anyway. He certainly doesn't see them within that next week. And when the village Eisteddfod comes around, he takes his harp and he demands to compete. And people are sort of confused and wondering when he started to learn to play an instrument. They were fairly sure that they'd have heard this gossip going around. But they watch as he puts his fingers to the strings and he starts to play, and it is the most beautiful music that they have ever heard. And people can't help themselves from tapping their feet and clapping their hands, and it isn't long before people are up from their seats and they are dancing. And pretty soon, this man, he is in high demand for every single wedding, every single party, every single tumpath, which is sort of like a Welsh ceilidh, every single celebration. And he starts to make quite a lot of money. He starts travelling further afield, all over Wales with this beautiful harp. It's the best music that anybody has ever heard. And one day, as he is sat playing his harp to a crowd of dancing people who are spinning around the room, he spots an old guy in the corner. And he knows that old guy. This is the person who told him that he was the worst singer who had ever been born, the worst singer who had ever lived. And he is a great musician now, and that guy has never once apologised. And so he starts to play faster, and faster, and faster, and he watches with a twinkle of delight in his eye as this old man in the corner, who can't help but dancing, gets more and more and more out of breath, and everybody else on the dance floor is equally as out of breath, because, you know, once you hear this music, you can't stop dancing, and people are saying, hey, dyna digon, that's enough, maybe stop now, slofa loud, slow down. Dwi angen ôl diod arall, I need to go and get another pint. But he plays faster and faster and faster, and he plays faster and faster and faster until the old man in the corner falls down dead. And then the harp vanishes from under his fingers. And he sees outside the village hall those strangers, a Tylwyth Teg, a bobl bach, that had given him that harp not so long ago. And he's stuck then with no harp, but the worst singing voice that there has ever been. And he never sees the Tylwyth Teg again.
Fabulous. I love that. It's don't mess with the fairy folk.
Seriously, don't.
Or if they give you a gift, don't misuse it.
Oh, yeah. Very important.
Now, I mean, I don't know what age you are because it's none of my damn business, but you already said you're 19. And, I mean, I know you're young. And I am so impressed, I have to say, at your storytelling.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
Such a young age. I hope I live long enough to be able to hear you tell many, many more stories. But I mean, you're getting out there and you're going to festivals and, performing at festivals. So that kind of seems to be on the up for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had such a wonderful time last summer at Beyond the Border Festival, which has sadly come to the end of its life, but provided me with, so many wonderful opportunities and supported so many other amazing storytelling projects in Wales. So yeah, I've been able to do some pretty cool stuff. A lot of it with my lovely partner Ailsa Dixon. We have a show together called Harris and Hasten, which isn't really getting out much anymore, but we're going to perform that in Shropshire in January at Blast Storytelling Club. And we're going to start working on something new. We've been discussing some various different ideas as we've been island hopping. But to be honest, I haven't got as much time as I would like for storytelling stuff. I'm kind of bogged down with uni, but I'm very, very lucky to be going to uni in Cardiff, where there is the wonderful Chapter Arts Centre, which has so much cool stuff going on, including the Cardiff Storytelling Circle. So, even when other than like peak exam season, I've been able to every month go and share stories and hear stories with some absolutely wonderful and lovely Welsh storytellers.
And you're studying medicine?
Yeah, I am. So it's quite a heavy workload, but I'm really loving it. I have to say that so far I feel like the storytelling stuff has really helped me in most of the communication and history taking sessions that we've had. And one of my favourite little things as I'm going about my daily life at uni is walking past this statue of the physicians of Myddfai and their mother, whose name has been lost, but she was a lady of the lake. So there's a statue of them, this important line of Welsh physicians, whose mother was one of the Tylwyth Teg, and apparently that's how they got their knowledge. So there is more overlap between storytelling and my storytelling and my medical school life.
And how do you see that going? I mean, are you specialising in anything?
Ideally, I'd love to become a GP. I love the science, and I find that stuff really, really interesting. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm actually doing medicine, but it's the people side of things that I think I love the most, and the community side of things. And there's some very exciting stuff going on. Potentially, we'll see how it develops, where, with social prescribing, which is something that GPs are starting to do, where storytelling is actually a part of that, where people speak up, which is a Welsh social enterprise have become part of this now, where they have a thing called Storytellers on Prescription, which is about helping to get rid of isolation. For lots of people who are housebound, it's really difficult to just get out and socialise. And in lockdown as well, they had storytellers giving traditional tales over the phone. But I was at the Storytelling for Health conference, which was held in the University of South Wales this year. There was some really, really interesting stuff going on. I found out that in People Speak Up sort of area, the storytelling on prescription was even being included in some people's care packages when they were being discharged from hospital. So yeah, we'll see how it develops. It's pretty exciting.
I know that in Japan they had this forest bathing, isn't it called? Well, they sort of prescribe getting out in nature for people, because they know that is basically, it's good for you. It brings your stress levels down. It makes you feel calmer, less stressed, and so I am a great admirer of GPs sadly these days there are getting to be fewer and fewer with more and more patients, and the chances of getting to see one is starting to get difficult. We're really lucky because we live just a couple of 100 yards from the GP surgery in Stromness here. And I was fairly ill at the start of the year and would probably be doing about a daisy pushing right now if it wasn't for the GP who just really, he just took the time to really try to get to the bottom of what the hell was going wrong with me. And so I really appreciate that. But I mean, the fact that yourself, with that desire to help people, you know, being a people person and carrying the stories as well, is just fabulous. I was really looking forward to this chat tonight, and by God, you have not disappointed. It's been brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom.
So, Ffion Phillips, I can only thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing stories that you have told tonight from your native Wales. Thank you.
Thank you so much.